Hello, my name is Ziba. I came to Canada as a refugee with my husband and our children. We had a rough start, but we were thankful to make Canada our new home. Being new in the country, things were smooth and great at first, but later turned sour after my husband could not find a job because of his lack of Canadian work experience. It became worse as he started drinking and hitting me. He further stopped me from finding a job, claiming I needed to stay home and look after our children. The money from the government was not enough since we were looking after our extended family back home. I was tired of the fights and the scars which I could no longer hide in front of my children. I confided in a friend who connected me with a counselor, and I sought the help I needed. I am glad I spoke up.
Break the Silence in COVID-19, presented by the Artists and Artisans Development and Network, funded by the Red Cross Canada.
Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Oh, good evening if at all you're in Uganda. Are you in Uganda? Yes, if at all you're in Uganda, it is. I know it is exactly 9 p.m. in Uganda. So hello, how are you, Toronto? How are you, Canada? How are you, India? How are you, Mauritius? Where else can I go? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I officially welcome you to this edition of Break the Silence in COVID-19, brought to you by the Artists and Artisans Development and Network, funded by the Red Cross Canada, with the support of PR by Gisha Productions, Inc. How is your afternoon? How was your week? My name is Gloria Gift Nankunda, and I'll be your host this afternoon. I take this opportunity to, first of all, thank you for having been with us in the past workshops. And if you don't know what this is about, we are tackling the issue of elderly abuse and violence against women, especially this lockdown. Numbers have gone up, and as the show goes on, we shall be talking about some of the statistics. And if you're following us, if you've been following our Facebook, our Instagram, we're sharing more of this information out. So it is something we need to talk about. It is a conversation we need to have, and we encourage you to participate. So I officially welcome you to this edition. And as always, we shall be also getting some performances from some of the artists that have been able to work with us throughout this period, throughout the preparation of this workshop, and have worked really hard to be a part of this. I'll be sharing with you who's going to be with us. We shall also be hearing from somebody whose story is a life experience, and she'll be sharing it with us today as one of our speakers, Miss Karen Friedman, but I'll be telling you a little bit more about her shortly. You're very, very welcome wherever you are, wherever you're watching us from. If watching on Facebook, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. If you're on YouTube, we encourage you to subscribe so that you know what Artists and Artisans Development and Network is all about. Now, you must be wondering, or probably you've been hearing from our past workshops, because we've been having this all through October, and we shall be holding the same workshops all through November. Artists and Artisans was formed in the year 2014 to work with artists and artisans, especially immigrants in Canada. And as I can tell you right now, they're working with over 500 artists with over 112 languages. And that means helping them to access cultural and economic opportunities here in Toronto and in Canada at large. Something else you should know about Arts and Artisans as well is that their mission is to provide support and opportunities for economic and social development of artists and artisans of all artistic practices who are newcomers to Canada and from other minority groups. I take this moment in a special way. You must be wondering, how does this all come together? Well, there is a team behind this series. There is a team that works day and night. We communicate daily. I cannot tell you what that is like. But I take this moment to thank, first of all, our head, who is Shireen Mandani, for being an amazing support and guide during this whole process of our preparation. I take this opportunity to thank our very own Manal Hussein. Thank you so much. Brian Kezala and Koyoyo, the man behind everything you're seeing right now. He's our tech person, editing, graphics, amazing. Blessy Regulars, thank you so much for being our coordinator. Marika Manteli, she is the brains behind our social media and or the video that you just saw. Actually, she's the woman behind the animation you just watched, which is a video talking about violence against women. Well, it is a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. I officially welcome you. Are we looking forward to some of your comments? Please engage and share. Breaking the silence. This is something we need to talk about. It is a conversation that needs to be heard, not just amongst women, but in our communities, because it may not happen to you, but I bet you know someone or two that have gone through this. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start off our show today with the performance from the one and only Miss Nana Valajam, who is born in Iran and a newcomer dancer in Canada. She's also a choreographer and a physical theater director. She likes mythology and rituals. She uses semiotics of the old cultures in her artwork and in her performance. Nana Valajam believes that peace and love work in the world if we try to improve kindness. She's also adopted the Avesta, which is an old holy book, to contemporary dance and physical theater, which was performed publicly in Armenia, in Georgia, and Malaysia, as well as in Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, I officially welcome you to today's first performance from Nana Valajam. You're very welcome. And wow, that is a performance about connection from Miss Nana Valajam. Wow. Just thinking about the whole point that it is about connection, and of course, the things that we're talking about, this is actually inspired by us wanting to connect with not just the people that are going through this, but we're also telling them you are not alone. If you're somebody out there, and maybe in the past you have been victim, I would say, or you've been a victim of violence in your relationship, from your partners, from your families, and not just about being a woman. Even the men actually do suffer this. But we were just looking at the numbers, and the UN has described the worldwide increase in domestic abuse as a shadow pandemic alongside COVID-19. Did you know that? And about 243 million women have experienced domestic violence in the last 12 months. So we are having this conversation because we need to have it. And we are also telling the people that are out there, you are not alone. You're not going through this alone. And I'm very honored to be, just a part of this. Once again, if you've just joined us, thank you for joining us. You're watching Break the Silence in COVID-19, brought to you by the Artists and Artisans Development and Network, funded by the Red Cross Canada. We are having this discussion, of course, once again, to say thank you so much for those that have made this possible. Just like I've said, the Canadian Red Cross, thank you so much for the support. The government of Canada, we appreciate you so much for making sure that this series is in the works today. We take this opportunity once again to thank our Member of Parliament, Ms. Salma Zahid. Thank you for your support. Thank you so much. And of course, our Member of Provincial Parliament, Christina Metas. We cannot thank you enough for your support and guidance through this process. Now, our speaker for today, not only is she talking about this because she's an expert at it, but she is an expert as a person who has suffered this and is now in recovery and has recovered, and she's able to talk about her experience today. Karen Friedman is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Guelph. Her book, which is 1 Hour in Paris, A True Story of Rep and Recovery, won the 2015 BC National Award for Canadian Nonfiction. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please allow me to introduce the one and only Miss Karen Friedman.
Hi, Gloria. Thank you for such a nice introduction.
A pleasure, a pleasure. It is all you. You've done all of this. How are you? How has been your week?
My week's been okay. I'll tell you, that dance performance we just saw was unbelievable. That just that made my week. That was really thrilling to watch.
Right from the title, the moment I saw the word connection, because we are longing for this. I was telling you that if I could, in our rehearsal, I said if I could hug you, I would, because we've been communicating for close to a month, and now here we are. We get to see each other. So this alone is a connection, and Nana's performance. We're all longing for this right now, aren't we?
Yeah. It's been a hard time. It's hard to be isolated in our homes, and I think this is just an amazing series you're running.
Well, a pleasure, my dear. Well, we are here talking about domestic violence. We have been discussing elderly abusers from our past workshops. Today, just to tell us a little bit about who you are from the horse's mouth, of course, and please go ahead with your talk for today.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you again for having me here today. And I want to thank in particular the Artists and Artisans Development Network. It's an amazing organization, and I feel really privileged and honored for the opportunity to talk to you and everybody who is part of this organization and who is listening here today, and to talk to everyone who's taking their time out of their busy Halloween Saturdays. So thank you for being here. And I look forward to answering any questions that you might have when I'm done my talk. So before I get started, I just want to spend a minute to acknowledge the land on which I live and work. Because of COVID, I'm working at home these days, like so many of us. Normally in a fall semester, I'd be teaching at the University of Guelph. I don't know about the rest of you, but this experience of not being with my people has left me feeling very displaced and isolated from my community. And I think that feeling of disconnection and dislocation should give us extra pause and hopefully a heightened understanding as we reflect on the ongoing occupation of Indigenous lands, including this sacred land, which is situated on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. So as I move into the conversation today, I want to express my gratitude as a settler for having the opportunity to live and work on this stolen land. I also want to honor the fact that what I'll be talking about today is a difficult subject for a lot of people, for most people. So I want to just give a bit of a warning that there may be some language or parts of the discussion that might be difficult or triggering for some of the listeners. So I'm going to be speaking about my own experience as a rape survivor. And after I tell my personal story, I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why I think it's important that we tell these sorts of survivor stories, stories about sexual violence, domestic violence, and other forms of abuse. I want to highlight in particular the positive value that can be gained from breaking the silence, the value to the individual survivor, the value to other survivors, and the value more broadly to society at large. And I'm also going to talk about some of the real challenges that we face in doing so. Violence, including sexual violence and domestic violence, emotional, physical, verbal, impacts individuals across all demographics, as Gloria just mentioned, all ages, all genders. That said, my focus today will be largely on women because the threat of violence is unfortunately a daily reality, in particular for women, and in particular for women in vulnerable communities, Black, Indigenous, and women of color, as well as women in queer and trans communities and women with disabilities. These communities are facing escalating problems since the start of the pandemic, which has laid bare and intensified current and historical structural inequalities in society, with devastating impacts. It has been a particularly bad time for women, actually. Women who are overrepresented in the care economy, including essential workers in health services and childcare, long-term and elder care. Data show that 70% of the job losses related to the pandemic have been suffered by women. So what we're seeing is a kind of double whammy. Women are more at risk when working and more at risk of losing their jobs. And to top it off, in many traditional households, divisions of labor continue along gendered lines, with women shouldering the bulk of domestic and extra care work, which is a lot with children at home right now, some children at least. Importantly, this is all happening against a backdrop in Canada, at least, where Canadians are feeling financial pressures of lost jobs and income stress, which, as Gloria mentioned, is tragically exacerbating the conditions for domestic violence, sexual violence, child abuse, and elder abuse, all of which have been escalating since the start of the pandemic. Social workers these days are reporting that the pandemic has become what they're calling a new tool for abusers to gain power. With many women stuck at home, the situation has been described as a pressure cooker with no escape valve. There have been dramatic increase in calls to helplines, and the pandemic has created serious challenges for women trying to leave abusive situations, for it's not clear exactly where is a safe place to go when the world isn't very safe. In this context of COVID, I think the importance of survivor stories is heightened, like so much else, since it's a time when so many people are feeling isolated. But before I say why I think this is the case, I first want to acknowledge just how hard these kinds of conversations can be. Many people who have suffered violence and abuse feel tremendous shame in the aftermath. We often blame ourselves. I know I did. And I think that is a natural response to living in a society which perpetuates victim-blaming norms and which is structured in a way that makes us as survivors feel humiliated and embarrassed and responsible for the acts of violence that we endure, even though it is never our fault. What's more, when women do go public with these sorts of stories, they face serious misogynistic backlash, which threatens their health, their safety, their families and community, and tragically, even their lives. And often, when despite all of these risks, women do find the courage to break the silence, they are often not even believed in the first place, even though they deserve to be. Their stories are unfortunately ignored or denied, belittled or mocked, and distorted through very entrenched myths about sexual violence and domestic abuse. And the unfortunate result of all of this is that women stay silent. Their stories remain hidden, buried in a culture of shame. That was at least my experience. I lived in that feeling of shame for years, decades actually. I was 22 years old when I was raped. It was August 1990, and I had spent the summer backpacking through Europe when I arrived in Paris, France, to meet an ex-boyfriend. He had also been traveling through Europe, and he was staying at an apartment in Paris of a friend of his. There was another house guest there as well, a Frenchman who was about 30 years old and who seemed nice enough. Later that evening, he and I ended up alone in the apartment together. First, he very kindly made me dinner, and then, over the course of an hour, with a sharp knife pressed against my neck, he raped me, and in doing so, changed my life forever. From the moment that that knife first grazed my neck until I broke free of his stranglehold in the lobby of the apartment building 1 hour later, I was rendered mute. I was jammed in a state of sheer terror that later imploded in my body and stayed lodged there for decades. Now that night is a point in my life which is frozen in time, or at least it was for many, many years, which should perhaps come as no surprise. This is precisely what research into psychological trauma tells us about what happens when our biological impulse to resist threat gets interrupted. Human beings have a natural fight or flight instinct, an automatic impulse to run and escape danger. When we suspect that we are in serious trouble, we want to fight back if we can't run, and if we can't do either of those, the human nervous system becomes overwhelmed. We become paralyzed in this feeling of powerlessness, and that's what happened to me on that fateful night. With a sharp knife at my neck throughout, alongside never-ending threats to end my life, there was no possibility of escape. I fell into a state of terror, and though my mind was racing the whole time, I did not say a word during the events that transpired. Now that was a terrifying hour, and I did not expect to get out of it alive, but I did. And the moment I became free marked the start of, well, one very long night, followed by a couple of long months, and a couple of long years, followed by an even still longer decade, during which time I battled the trauma and its aftermath in silence, doing everything I could to just forget about that night, to move beyond what had happened to me, to pretend it never happened to me. The fact that I battled in silence is connected to a decision I made the night that I returned home from Paris, when I resolved that despite my family and my two best friends, I would not tell a soul what had happened to me. So it's easy for me to see now that the decision to cover up the rape didn't help me. It became a secret that festered deep inside of me, and it took on a life of its own. But at the time, I told myself that I wanted to keep it a secret because it would just be too difficult to talk about. Now, that was true. I felt so vulnerable and so humiliated that I couldn't imagine uttering the words "I was raped" out loud, even though I felt at the time like it was emblazoned on my forehead in big red letters for everyone to see. But if I'm honest, I kept it a secret because I didn't want to face the fact that my identity had changed overnight and that I was now and forever a rape survivor. I kept it a secret because I wanted to pretend it was no big deal, that it was behind me, and I kept it a secret because I blamed myself and I was consumed with shame. So I buried it. But then I relived it every day and every night through sleepless nights, debilitating anxiety, a series of rolling panic attacks, and relentless flashbacks. Because that is what happens with trauma when we ignore it. It takes on a life of its own. Keeping the rape a secret made my life worse, not better. After a full decade of suffering in silence, I finally acknowledged that there was a reason behind my anxiety, my panic, my failed relationships, and my occasional dependency on alcohol. I made a decision to see a therapist, and after some hard work, I was finally able to talk about my own experience. And then I was able to share it with the important people in my life. And finally, I started to speak publicly about it in venues like this. I even wrote a book about it. And what I learned over all those years is that there is tremendous value in breaking the silence on these issues. There's value for the survivor herself. There's value for other survivors who get to hear these stories. And there's value to society at large. So let me say a little bit about each of these kinds of positive value. First, the value to other survivors. As I discussed earlier, many people are simply not in a position to tell their story. It might not be safe to do so. They may fear not being believed for good reason, unfortunately, or they may be too traumatized by the experience to speak of it, like I was. They may not have the proper supports in place. For these survivors who can't yet speak about their own experience, having the opportunity to hear someone else's story, better yet, someone who looks like them or who sounds like them or who is from their community or one like it, well, I think seeing ourselves represented in this way can be just very deeply impactful. When I think about my own experience and how isolated I felt 30 years ago, well, at that time, certainly I knew that there were other rape survivors in the world. I had read a couple books, but I personally did not know a single one. Or at least no one I knew was out and talking about it. It is hard to overstate how important it would have been for me back then to have been able to hear and learn from other stories, from other survivors, from other women who had experiences like mine, to be able to feel that kind of solidarity, to be able to sense that kind of community, and to have my experience represented for me at a time when I was just too vulnerable to make myself visible in the same way. I think that's especially true for people from marginalized communities, because people in those communities are in general less visible in society and therefore less likely to see themselves represented in these kinds of ways. This is important not just from the solidarity we gain from the experience of others, as I mentioned, but it's important for another really serious reason, because in hearing a multitude of voices, we begin to see a pattern. And that pattern helps us to reframe our experience, not just as something that happened to me, for instance, because of what I was wearing or who I was with or where I happened to be, but rather as a widespread sociological phenomenon, something that happens to women everywhere in all sorts of communities. And that reinforces that these experiences are not our fault. They are the function of a society in which violent and abusive behaviors are normalized and accepted. This brings me to the second way in which going public and breaking the silence results in positive value. Because in telling these survivor stories, people have the power to affect broad social and cultural change. These stories have the ability to make unpleasant truths about violence and abuse tangible in a way that sometimes theorizing misses. They push evidence of this reality into the spotlight and therefore push back against false narratives about violence and abuse. In fact, I think the Me Too movement is a very good illustration of this. Me Too was a campaign started in 2007 by the pioneering activist Tarana Burke, herself a survivor of sexual violence. And she started it as a grassroots movement to aid sexual assault survivors in underserviced communities. A decade later, that movement gained traction on Twitter with the hashtag #MeToo. In the first year alone, there were 19 million tweets of survivor stories. And in those tweets, what we saw is women from all communities. We saw cis women, we saw trans women, we saw women of color, we saw indigenous women, we saw Hollywood women, but we saw everybody. And all of these women telling their stories, well, it seems just obvious that this has shifted the general understanding of the pervasiveness of violence against women. Now, those of us who work in this field didn't really need Me Too to see this pandemic of violence against women. But what we have seen is that in telling these stories of sexual violence, a multitude of stories, that has a real power to challenge dominant misconceptions, overturn rape myths, and debunk traditional victim blaming narratives. And that brings me to the final reason why I think these stories are really important, which is that there can be tremendous positive value to the individual who speaks about her own experience. Having our stories heard by a willing and receptive audience can help survivors combat the shame and the silence that all too often piggybacks on these sorts of traumatic life experiences. Telling our stories can be a way of saying, this is not on me, this is not my fault, I have nothing to be ashamed of, and my truth is worth making known. And every time you put that in the world, you take it a little bit off your own shoulders. For the survivor, giving voice to her own story can help give her life meaning and maximize her own self-worth. It can be a privilege to tell one's story, and giving someone a chance to see you in it with the dignity and with the respect that you deserve. While we cannot change what has happened to us, we are not powerless about it either. We do have some measure of control over the way we live with trauma, over how we process it, and over how we take care of ourselves in the aftermath. Not everybody deals with trauma in the same way, and there is no one right way for how to deal with it or for how to take care of ourselves. But I will say that in my case, talking about it has helped me to heal. That said, the trauma is never gone. Trauma is a chronic condition. And there are times, in particular, in times of high stress, where it comes back to haunt me. Right now, in this time of COVID, it has reappeared, even though I am fortunately safe in my own home. And I imagine that many people in my kind of situation have been triggered by COVID. With trauma survivors who have experienced an unexpected terror, what happens is that we often fear for the worst, our nervous system caught in a state of expecting harm. For us, COVID re-triggered that. COVID was unexpected. And for many of us, it can bring us right back to the brink, our anxiety at full tilt, feeling like we're at the edge of a sinkhole. I think in this time of acute stress, we all have to work very deliberately to take care of ourselves. And on that note, I want to end by just reiterating something I said at the start of my talk, which is to reinforce that while there are serious and significant positive benefits to telling our survivor stories, not everyone is in a position to do so. For many people, there are serious risks and challenges, and no one should ever feel obliged to break their silence and tell their story until they are ready to, if that ever happens. It is a deeply personal decision that requires safety and proper supports today. But I do hope to have shown that if someone is in a position to do that, there is tremendous value to be gained. Thanks so much for listening.
Miss Karen Friedman, where do I start? Just listening to your story, just listening to, the courage that you're seated here, telling us it might have happened. I love that you said it might have happened how many years ago, but, hearing you, for me, it's like, I'm going to share with you something that I won't say, it's not even close to what happened to you, but, I was looking back into my life. Wow. First of all, I'm glad that you are here with us to tell us this story, because somebody else might not have been here to share this story. So I'm really glad. And Ramesh here also says, excellent presentation of a true experience in life. Thank you so much for sharing. Brayo also says, thank you so much, Karen, for sharing. It's so touching. Just listening to you, I love the statement that you said, my truth is worth making known. I can't imagine what that took you, how long that took you. And another point is that until the person is ready to share, we shouldn't force them to share.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine what was going on in your mind at that time when that happened. And, you're thinking, should I share? Where do I even start? Especially from a point of believability. you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, thank you, Gloria, for your nice comments, for all the people who are contributing in the comment section. Thank you. I do think, it's a tricky thing because in my case, I couldn't even talk about it for 10 years. I mean, let alone share it with someone else. I just felt too vulnerable. And there are lots of women who maybe feel less vulnerable than I do, but are in a very unsafe domestic situation or with their family or community, and is not in a position to share their story. And so we can't, I don't think, tell everyone, break the silence, share your story. That has to be something that is considered very carefully and done only when safety protocols are in place. And it's true that even when women do tell their stories, because of the prejudices in society, we are often not believed. We see this again and again. This is why sexual violence against women is the most notoriously underreported crime, because
I
people
believe
just
you. I believe you. Just, I'm sorry, I cut you short a bit in there.
Yeah, no, that's
I'm
okay.
going to share. This is an experience. It actually happened to me about a few years ago. I was on radio and I had this friend, and again, it doesn't just happen from strangers. This can happen to you from a close friend or someone you trusted to hang with, and then something happens. A friend of mine. I was on radio at a time in Uganda. This is about 12, 15 years ago, and he calls me up and says, Gloria, I've had too much to drink. Please come drive me home. Of course, it's my friend, and we get into the car. For those who know, I was in Makindye. Those who have an idea of where Makindye is in Uganda. And, I drove him home. So towards his home, there was a bit of like a bit of a forest, green. There was a lot of green around us. So he says, stop the car. I'm thinking he wants me to stop the car. Maybe he's going to go help himself. And he does something. He pulls the keys away from me. And then he locks the doors, all the doors, like, I don't know, because it was his car. So he knew what to do. He locked all the doors. And I'm thinking, I'm just here. Come on, So this is my friend, first and foremost. And I'm saying, come on, I'm trying to get you home. Let us. And he strangled me. I lost my voice for a week, Karen. I'm sorry to share this with you, but I'm just resonating. And I went home. He was bad. And then he apologized quickly. He's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe. I said, what are you doing? And he slapped me. And I said, not even my father had ever slapped me. How can you do this? You're my friend. I literally left my home to come and take you home. You know what I mean? And then there was an abandoned building, and he apologizes, and now he wants to drive. Because I'm like, we're close to your house, so okay. Now he's very apologetic. I'm so sorry. How could I do this to you? Now he's very shameful. He decides to drive. He's like, let me drive. I said, you know what? Just put me by the roadside. I'll take a cab home. You're close to your home. And meanwhile, he's doing this while his daughter and wife are in the house. So I'm angry, I'm perturbed, I'm trying not to, because you don't want to agitate the person. I do know what he could have done. He had a knife in the car. It was not nice, just to share. And then he,
Sounds horrible.
when he was driving close to the main road, there was an abandoned house. And then he stops the car again. He came to the back of the car, Karen. He got out, parked. Oh my God, he parks the car and then he takes out a knife, and I'm like, what are you doing? Remember, I'm in an abandoned house. Anything could have happened. And it's like he put the knife on my thigh and he cut me just a little bit. And I said, I'm sorry to say this, his privates. I had long nails then, and I really grabbed them like this, literally. I said, you're not doing this. This is not happening. And, again, then he comes out of it like he doesn't know what's going on. And then he apologized again and dropped me at a petrol station. And then I got a cab and I went home. I cried. I told my mom at that point, and I lost my voice for a week. So I didn't work on air that week. And then when I came back on air, I shared this story, and I can tell you, I think people even laughed at me. I tried to report this, and somebody said, it was a big person. He was a lawyer, and he was a bit known then. And I couldn't even say his name because who's going to believe me? I'm just a girl on radio, So I hear you when you talk about believability. I lost my voice for a week because he really choked me. So Oh,
Gloria,
I've
that's
never
an
shared
that
this. I've not shared this in a long time. So when you're sharing your story, I'm reliving it, like you said, that this lockdown has, it brings back so many things, and I
yeah,
resonate with you. So I'm glad
yeah,
to be here to share this with you. But
yeah.
I
Thank you for
resonate with
sharing it.
believability, being afraid. Will I be believed? What are they going to say? He's a lawyer. They won't even believe me. It's his word against mine. But I had the evidence. I had something. I had the cut on my thigh. My voice was gone, but I couldn't prove that because I was still scared. How are they going to believe me? So anyway, I share that with you. And I love the fact that you mentioned about blaming ourselves, blaming the victim, blaming herself. It takes a lot. It takes a lot for you to speak up. I appreciate that about you. And also, I love the fact that you said it's not just about sharing the story. It is about breaking the social and cultural, bringing about social and cultural change. And I think
Hmm.
Me Too, the world can identify with Me Too all over.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Gloria, your story's in my head, and I'm thinking all about your story, and I'm thinking about your courage to be able to use your long nails to fight back, even though he had a
Literally,
knife.
literally.
Um, and I'm thinking about that courage, and I'm thinking about what happens after those kinds of experiences when we feel like no one's going to believe us, and like this person is in a position of power and authority, and who am I to say anything? And
And the
so
fact that he
thank
was my friend, because
yeah,
people had seen us hang. So, you don't just come and say somebody I had a drink with yesterday repped me today. What? People might be like, but you were okay yesterday. So it's all of those. But to the person watching here, to the person listening, I'm saying it is not your fault. It is
it is
not
not
your
your
fault.
fault.
And just thanking Arts and Artisans for bringing about the fact that we are breaking the silence. It is stories like these, Karen, that it's to encourage somebody out there to say, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Somebody else has gone through this, and look at them. Or what can I learn from Karen's story? What can I learn from what I'm just hearing from Gloria? Ramesh here says, breaking the silence brings to the public of trauma one has been through in their life. But it's very important as well to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate just everybody. Once again, I am talking about the value to others. So it's not just about us sharing our story. It is, how can my story bring about change in somebody else's life?
Yeah, because I do think that, I mean, it's true that in telling our stories, making our truth known and honoring our own experiences, that is incredibly valuable for people, but it also helps for others who aren't in a position to tell their stories to hear someone who looks like them or who's from their hometown, or to say, oh, this is happening to other people, enables them to really feel a sense of solidarity, that they're not alone and not isolated. Because the thing with these kinds of acts, they almost always happen alone. You're almost always alone. It's not like other kinds of traumatic experience that happen to groups of people. We're so isolated as the experience is happening. And then we think we're the only one it's happened to. But of course, it's happening everywhere. And the more we talk about it, the more it seems clear that it's happening everywhere. And it seems clear that if it's happening everywhere, I guess, I'm not responsible for that.
Absolutely. And just, as you share about that, Karen, as well, you mentioned Hollywood. Because we are used to seeing the glamour, the lights, but we don't actually know what goes on behind the scenes. And most of these, for us, what I think that's what the Me Too movement has done. Sometimes it might say you people blame the victims, or you were looking for a job, or you wanted the job. That's why you were with all the perpetrators that are in the news so far, and that are being talked about, that are being brought to light. I love that women. It's not just stopping about saying so and so did this to me. It is about ensuring that this person faces the consequences for their actions.
Yeah.
And it's very, very important. So to the person that may be out there and they may be a victim of this, I promise you, you're not alone, and do not feel sorry for the perpetrator. They deserve to face the consequences of their actions.
Do not feel sorry for the perpetrator.
I beg. Absolutely. Chetna Desai here says, excellent and very empowering talk. Thank you so much, Chetna, for joining us. And just a bit about Hollywood, because, Karen, again, we are breaking the silence in terms of we are identifying with the person like you and I. You know, we might look at the stars out there and they're just being stars, but before they are stars, these are women. These are men that are being sexually exploited. So I want to say that if somebody in Hollywood can stand up and speak up, I want that to encourage you. We can't just love these people because of the joy they bring unto us. It's also how we share in their pain, how we share in their experiences. Just shed a little bit about that for me, because like I said, I was scared to speak about it because who would believe me? As a radio host then, as a person in the limelight, who would believe me? Tell me, so talk a little bit more about that, Karen, please.
You mean about the Hollywood people coming
When
forward?
people are in the limelight, because Hollywood is something that we all can identify or we know of. So talk about people in the limelight who are actually scared to come up and speak because it exists.
Yeah, well, I think that what's most shocking is, you read about some of the people, for instance, who came forward during the Bill Cosby trial to give their testimony against him. And these are well-known, if they're not Hollywood actors, they're socialites, they're people who are very well-known, they have a lot of money, and they came forward and they were not believed. And what's so bizarre in those kinds of situations, you see just how deeply, deeply entrenched victim-blaming norms are. Sometimes you have a situation where it's like a he said, she said. But in those situations with Harvey Weinstein, with Bill Cosby, it was he said and they said, where it was like 15 people, 20 people, 30 people against one man. And often the man still triumphed. I mean, for how many years did Harvey Weinstein get away with doing what he did? And all the other high-powered men who over the years we have seen, them brought to justice finally. How many people had to come forward? Why wasn't it enough that one person said, this is what happened to me? I mean, we needed to hear 30, 40, 50 people before they were finally taken seriously. In no other kind of context would we need to have that level of, majority in order for something to be believed. It's only in the context of violence against women.
Well, I hear you. I hear you in this regard. And it's amazing that you just brought out that point. Like, how much did we need for us to actually believe that this person had done something wrong? Anyway, oh my God, this is a talk. I feel like we could go on talking for more and more for more time. But you know what? I want to take this opportunity to say what an honor to be talking to you, Karen Friedman. Thank you so much for sharing your story, just your own expertise, your own perspective, and what it takes to be a victim, and what it takes to be in recovery, what it takes to actually seek recovery, to seek healing. And right now we're talking about the times. I can't imagine how many women are in their homes and they are facing this violence or sexual violence from their partners. Can you imagine that? Like, that is because we're in the lockdown now, and I cannot imagine what is happening. Culturally speaking, I personally come from a culture where we don't talk about things. We kind of sweep things under the rug, but I encourage people, let's talk about this. Let's share in this, because maybe I'll say something. Maybe I will know a number that somebody you can talk to, a counselor. But culturally speaking, I mean, you talked a bit about that in terms of by speaking up, we bring about our social and cultural change, but also in terms of breaking free from the cultural prison, because this is real, this is real. And, in Africa, I would say in Uganda, we have numbers of the youth pregnant. We have so many pregnant kids within this period, and that saddens me, because I'm imagining also these families it's a mother and a father in there, but their daughter is pregnant. So, and some of these pregnancies are brought about by their fathers themselves, Karen. You can't believe this, but my heart is heavy. My heart is heavy. And
my heart is heavy when you say that also. It's
breaking the silence is not just about, we're talking about the women, but I'm talking about it from the ground, from the youth, from the teenagers, from, the children. We are talking about children, 10 years old.
Yeah.
And this is not just one particular place, but when you read the news, as I was telling you, that according to the UN, they're calling this a shadow pandemic alongside COVID-19. By the time the UN has such a statistic, then you know that something is wrong and we need to deal with it.
Yeah, although I would take issue with that. I don't think it's a shadow pandemic. It's a pandemic. It's been going on forever. I mean, we know that violence against women has been a pandemic for as long as we can remember. I recognize that it's been heightened in COVID, just like everything has. All the structural and historical inequalities in society have just come to light, including this. And
Yes.
so I understand why they're using the language of a shadow pandemic, but
At the same
beyond
time,
a shadow.
it is beyond a shadow. It is a reality. And they actually say that the cases have increased by over 20% as
I
many people
know.
are trapped in their homes with their abuser. And that's what I was trying to bring forward, whereby this is actually happening from within our family members, within our friends, and within our society. Sadiqa Norizon says, excellent presentation. Thank you so much for joining. Well, we've talked about this. This is a conversation that shouldn't be for one day, I promise. This is something, or for 1 hour. It's something that we need to talk about because people relieve and relieve. I want to say thank you so much, Karen, for being with us, for sharing your story, for the courage to share your story, and for your book, because now it's not just here, it is shared worldwide. And the book is called 1 Hour in Paris, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Karen. We appreciate
Gloria,
you so much.
thank you for such an engaging discussion, and thank you for just inviting me. And it was so lovely to get to know you over this period of time. And thanks again to the Artists and Artisans Development Network and the Red Cross, who I understand sponsored this. And it's just, I'm just really delighted to have had the opportunity to talk to your organization today. So thank you very much.
Well, such a pleasure. We are very, very happy to have you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who has been watching. This is Break the Silence in COVID-19, once again brought to you by the Artisans Development Bank Development Network and funded by the Red Cross Canada. I want to also acknowledge the supporting teams, which is the Board of Directors for Artisans and Development Network, Gisha Productions Inc., also Positive Community Development. Thank you so much. Creative Joys, Chaptel Films. Thank you. The IDRF. Thank you so much. Ryerson University. We could not have done this without you. Trius College, University of Toronto, Diversity Cultural Association, Swar Jangan Music Academy, and many others. Once again, we acknowledge the team behind this. Thank you so much, Ms. Shireen Mandani, for the support. Thank you so much, Manal Hussein, for the hard work. Thank you, Brian Kezalankoyo, your Blessy Regulus, Marikam and Lee. I cannot thank you so much, guys. Gisha Productions team in charge of PR, the artists. I thank you so much for taking your time to be a part of this event. Join us once again next Saturday, which will be the 7th of November. We are again going to be holding this all the way at exactly 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. and also holding this on the 21st, on the 7th, on the 14th, on the 21st, on the 28th, and the 29th. I promise you, so much to talk about because this is an ongoing conversation and it is not a conversation that is about to end. My name has been Gloria Gift Nankunda. Once again, thank you for joining us. To everybody that joined us on Facebook, for sharing, for simply listening and participating, for sharing, for appreciating this. Thank you so much. I can't mention all of you. We appreciate you. I leave you with the one and only Nana Valajam, who once again, who takes her adaptation from Avesta. In addition, she has also authored some books about the myths and poetry titled Arash in 22 mythical stories, the light stories in Old Persia, which is kindness, the Buddhist text Forever. And she has also been a part of her Voice project, as well as the Inclusive Arts Festival through the Artists and Artisans Development and Network. It has been a pleasure. And until next Saturday, happy Halloween and have yourself a lovely afternoon. Ciao.